Margaret's grandparents lived in a small town in upstate New York in the 1950s. Her grandfather was in law enforcement and his job required frequent relocations. During one of these moves, they were assigned a temporary residence, a farmhouse on the outskirts of town, miles away from their nearest neighbor. Margaret's grandmother, who was 5 months pregnant at the time, and her two children, a 13-year-old daughter and a 7-year-old son, moved in with him. The house was old and run down, with white paint peeling off the walls and windows that rattled every time the wind blew. The floors creaked under every step, and the basement, oh, the basement, was the stuff of nightmares. It smelled of damp earth and mildew, with dim lighting and cobwebs hanging in the corners. It was more like a cellar than a basement, and Margaret's grandmother hated going down there. By the time they arrived, it was nearly 9 p.m., and everyone was exhausted from the long journey. They set up their beds and quickly fell asleep. But around 2 a.m., Margaret's grandmother woke up, needing to use the bathroom. The only problem, the bathroom wasn't in the house. It was in the basement. Now, Margaret's grandmother wasn't easily scared. She was the kind of woman who could face anything. But that night, as she stood at the top of the creaky wooden stairs looking down into the dark basement, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: fear. She tried walking her brother-in-law, who was sleeping in the next room, but he was a deep sleeper and didn't stir. Left with no other choice, she grabbed a flashlight and made her way down alone. The air in the basement was cold and heavy. The dim light from her flashlight barely lit the narrow path between the old furniture and crates that had been left behind. She hurried to finish and started climbing up the stairs when she heard it, a faint rustling sound behind her. She froze, her heart pounding. Slowly, she turned around and shone the flashlight into the darkness, but nothing was there. Shrugging it off as her imagination, she climbed back upstairs and went to bed. The next night, the whole family was woken up by a loud thud outside the house, like something heavy had fallen. Margaret's grandfather and his brother grabbed flashlights and went to investigate. They checked every corner of the property but found nothing. No fallen tree branches, no broken items, no sign of anyone. But Margaret's grandmother couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching them. Later that night, as she lay in bed, she saw a shadow outside her bedroom window. At first, she thought it was just a trick of the moonlight, but then the shadow moved, slowly, deliberately, closer to the house. She tried to scream, but no sound came out. Her throat felt like it was closing up, as if something invincible was choking her. Finally, her muffled cries woke Margaret's grandfather, who shook her until she snapped out of it. Every night, the disturbances grew worse. Footsteps echoed in the grass outside, circling the house. Sometimes they sounded like someone wearing heavy boots. Other times, like high heels clicking against the wooden porch. One night, Margaret's grandmother heard footsteps descending into the basement. She grabbed a flashlight and went to check, but no one was there. Just as she turned to leave, the flashlight flickered, and she saw it. A shadowy figure standing at the far end of the basement. It was tall and vaguely human-shaped, but its features were distorted like a smudged painting. As it started moving toward her, Margaret's grandmother felt her legs lock in place. She couldn't move. She couldn't scream. The figure stopped just inches away from her, and in the dim light, she could make out its face, horribly disfigured with dark sunken eyes and streaks of blood across its cheeks. By now, Margaret's grandmother was physically and emotionally drained. Her health was deteriorating, and she begged her husband to get them out of the house. He went to the local authorities and demanded a new place, explaining the horrifying experiences his family was enduring. They were finally given a new home and moved out the next day. Before leaving, Margaret's grandmother spoke to a neighbor who revealed the dark history of the house. A woman, a former tenant and police officer, had taken her own life in the basement years earlier. No one knew why, but some said her spirit never left. The neighbor also mentioned that pregnant women who often attracted restless spirits, which could explain why Margaret's grandmother was targeted. The family never experienced anything like that again after moving, but Margaret's mother and uncle still remembered those nights vividly, and even decades later, they refuse to talk about it. As for Margaret, she says she avoids basement whenever she can, and after hearing this story, I don't blame her. So if you ever find yourself moving into an old, remote farmhouse, take a good look at the basement, and if you hear footsteps in the middle of the night, don't go looking. Tonight, I'll take you to a place in the heart of rural Georgia, an abandoned mansion known as Lawrence Manor, nestled on the outskirts of a small, forgotten town called Blackwood Hollow. This mansion was once the pride of Lawrence family, wealthy landowners in the area, but after the mysterious death of Victor Lawrence, strange and terrifying events began to plague the house. Locals still speak of it in hushed tones, calling it a cursed place. But this story doesn't start with Victor Lawrence's death. It starts with a thief named Thomas. Thomas had been eyeing Lawrence Manor for weeks. The mansion stood tall and silent, shrouded by thick woods. No one seemed to come or go, and the property was isolated. It was the perfect place for a robbery. Thomas figured that the family's wealth still lingered within its walls, hidden somewhere left behind after the mysterious death of Victor Lawrence. One moonless night, Thomas made his move. Armed with only a flashlight and a crowbar, he snuck into the house through a broken window at the back. The air inside was musty, thick with dust, and the silence felt suffocating. He crept through the house, searching the ground floor, but found nothing. Disappointed, he decided to check the upstairs bedrooms. As he ascended the old wooden stairs, a foul stench filled the air, stronger with every step. When Thomas reached the master bedroom, he froze. The door was slightly ajar, and what he saw inside made his blood run cold. 3 decomposing bodies lay sprawled across the bed, twisted, bloated, and covered in a layer of flies. The bodies had been left to rot for weeks, maybe even longer. The sight was enough to make Thomas' heart pound in his chest. He took a step back, the flashlight slipping from his hand as he struggled to comprehend the horror before him. Then instinct took over. Thomas bolted out of the house, his legs carrying him faster than he thought possible. He ran into the woods, his heart racing, his mind clouded with panic. What if someone saw him leaving? What if he was blamed for these deaths? He had to act fast. Desperate, he went straight to the local police station. When he told them about the bodies, they didn't believe him. Instead of offering help, they arrested him on suspicion of murder. He pleaded his innocence, insisting he was just a thief, but the cops weren't convinced. That same night, the police took Thomas back to Lawrence Manor. The officers found exactly what he had described: 3 heavily decomposed bodies lying on the bed. The smell was unbearable, and the sight of the bloated corpses was enough to disturb even the most seasoned officers. Forensics confirmed something chilling. The bodies had been dead for over 3 months. But here's where things get even stranger. The neighbors insisted that they had seen the Lawrence family alive just days before. Some had even spoken with them, and others reported seeing lights on in the windows at night. So how could the family had been dead for months if they'd been seen alive so recently? The Lawrence family had always been an odd bunch, because the father had been a stern and reclusive man, while his wife and 2 daughters were equally eccentric. The daughters rarely left the house, and when they did, they seemed to be in a daze, like they were sleepwalking through life. When the police searched the house, they found even more unsettling clues. Ritualistic symbols had been drawn on the walls of the master bedroom, and a bottle of phenyl was found near the bed. Blood-like stains mirrored the floor below bedroom. Some locals whispered that the family had been practicing dark magic. Others believed they were simply mentally unstable. The police investigation left more questions than answers. The house stood abandoned for years, but rumors about the police only grew. Paranormal enthusiasts began visiting the site, claiming to hear strange noises, whispers, footsteps, and unmistakable sound of things moving in the dark. The house became a notorious spot for ghost hunters and thrill seekers. Years later, a construction company bought the property hoping to tear down the old manor and build luxury apartments, but things quickly took a strange turn. Workers began experiencing bizarre accidents, tools would go missing, equipment would break for no reason, and one engineer even collapsed on site, blood pouring from his nose with no explanation. The crew became so unnerved that they abandoned the site altogether. To this day, Lawrence Manor remains standing in Blackwood Hollow, a place few dare to visit. Those brave enough to step foot on the property swear they feel an overwhelming sense of dread, as if something is watching them. Is this house cursed, haunted, or is simply a tragic, misunderstood mystery? Whatever the truth may be, one thing is for sure: the haunting of Lawrence Manor is a story that still chills those who dare to hear it. And it's a place that will leave you questioning everything the moment you step onto its grounds. You ever do something you know is a bad idea, but you do it anyway? That's exactly how I felt the night I went into my stepfather's basement. We lived in this old house in upstate New York, the kind with creaky floors, flickering lights, and a basement that always felt 10 degrees colder than the rest of the house. My stepfather, let's just call him Weird, had basically moved into that basement. He barely came upstairs. Mom said he wasn't always like this. She said he changed after getting his hands on some old book. She wouldn't tell me much more than just that. It wasn't good for him. She begged me never to go down there. But one night, I got my chance. It was late. I was watching TV when I heard my stepfather slam the front door. I peeked out the window and saw him pulling out of the driveway in a hurry. That's when I noticed he had forgotten to lock the basement door. I can't explain why, but I felt this pull, like the basement was calling me. Heart pounding, I grabbed my flashlight and made my way down. The wooden steps creaked under my weight, each one louder than the last. The air grew heavier, colder. That basement smelled mold, damp, paper, and something else. Something rotten. The only light came from a single flickering bulb in the ceiling. Shadows stretched across the room in unnatural ways. And there, in the center of it all, sat his desk. Papers scattered across the surface, dust-covered books stacked in messy piles, but one thing stood out: the book. It looked old. The leather cover was cracked, almost peeling. Strange symbols were carved into its spine. And the title, I don't even know what language it was in. The letters looked wrong, like they weren't meant to be read by human eyes. I knew I shouldn't touch it, but I did. The second my fingers brushed the cover, a cold shiver ran through my spine. The air in the room felt thicker, like something unseen had just woken up. I didn't think. I just grabbed the book and shoved it into my backpack before bolting back upstairs. The night everything felt off. The house was too quiet. The shadows in the corners seemed deeper. I tried to sleep, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I just made a huge mistake. At some point, exhaustion won, and that's when I had the dream. I was in my bed, but I wasn't alone. I couldn't see it, but I could feel it. Standing at the foot of my bed, watching. Then it spoke. A low, guttural whisper in a language I didn't understand, but somehow I felt the meaning. It was angry. I tried to move, I couldn't. I tried to scream, nothing came out. Then, bam! A slap. Something hit me, a force, invisible and violent, struck the side of my face. The pain was instant, real. I woke up gasping, my heart hammering against my ribs. My cheek was burning. I stumbled to the bathroom and flipped on the light. There, in the mirror, was a red mark on my cheek, right where I had been slapped. That was all I needed. I ran downstairs, ripped open the basement door, and threw the book back onto my stepfather's desk. I slammed the door shut and locked it. I never went down there again. The strangest part? My stepfather never said a word about it. He never asked if I had been in his room, but after that night, the way he looked at me changed. It was subtle, but I knew he knew. And sometimes, late at night, when the house is silent, I hear it. Whispers coming from the basement. And every now and then, I wake up to the feeling of something watching me from the darkness.